And this is turning out to be a very good way for us to share information with one another. You can also sign up for NICA Notes, which includes a weekly article by an invited author, followed by news updates of the week. And you can sign up for that at Alliance for Global Justice website, which you see at the bottom of the same screen, at the bottom of the same slide, afgj.org. There's a lot of information that you'll find there. Several ebooks about Nicaragua are also available at the same website, afgj.org, and they're free in both English and Spanish. They're downloadable in several formats. The ebooks cover topics such as the attempted coup of 2018, events in Nicaragua in 2019, disinformation about Nicaragua, and Nicaragua's indigenous people. We strongly urge you also, as I move to slide 2, we strongly urge you also to contact your Congress member and your senators to tell them that you're opposed to the Repressed Act. This bill would impose punitive and coercive measures on Nicaragua in an attempt to influence the outcome of the elections that are coming up in November in that country. There is a lot of information at the AFGJ website with an easy script and an email form. And you can see that URL at the very bottom of this slide, afgj.org again, but / urgent tell Congress no sanctions on Nicaragua. You'll find it easily if you go to afgj.org. If you would like to become more active in working against the Repressed Act, there are other things you can do also. You can join our lobbying committee. If you're interested in that, write your name and your email address in the chat and direct your note to the panelists, and we'll note it down and make sure you get included in the committee. And second, you can see a 15-minute video that we recently did about the Repressed Act and lobbying against it. If you go to bit.ly, that's bit.ly/Repressed lobbying. And again, I'll paste that into the chat. But that I think you'll find to be a very helpful video. Okay, this webinar is part of a series that occurs about once a month. Please mark your calendars for the following dates, which are at the same time as today, July 18th and August 22nd. The July 18th webinar, the topic will be U.S. intervention in Nicaragua's elections since 1984. And this will cover the most blatant U.S. interventions in each of these elections. The speakers are Chuck Kaufman and Niels McCune, who will address the U.S. funding of the opposition, the RAIN, I forget what that stands for, and then USAID and NED, Destabilization Project, and U.S. sanctions and other recent U.S. interference. Okay, so the URL for that, then you can just bit.ly/NICA July 18, and you can register for that webinar. Then the August 22nd webinar is entitled What's at Stake in Nicaragua's 2021 Elections? The speakers will be Sophia Clark and Saul Arana. And the registration link for that is bit.ly/NICA-OG22. Okay. So the format for today's 90-minute webinar is the following. Each speaker will have 15 minutes for their presentation, and after that, we should still have plenty of time for Q&A by the audience. And a note to the audience, you can put your comments in the chat, but please make sure that you put any questions intended for the panelists in the Q&A. I will be pulling those questions to address to the panelists. And now to introduce our first speaker, Jorge Cabellon, who describes himself. So I'm going to read what he says about himself. I am an Uruguayan, Swedish, Nicaraguan journalist and political analyst, born of social activism and the alternative media. I've worked for Swedish as well as Nicaraguan outlets for many years. My text can be read in Spanish, English, and Swedish in various websites such as Tortilla con Sal. I have also collaborated with global TV networks such as Actualidad, RT, and Hispan TV. Currently, I work for El 19 Digital, the Nicaraguan government's official web portal. Also, I collaborate with the TV review Estudio TN8, commenting on the political events of the week. I was born in Montevideo, Uruguay in 1961. At the age of 14, I had to leave the country with my family because of the military dictatorship, living in exile in Venezuela and later in Nicaragua during most of the 80s. From Nicaragua, I moved to Sweden, where I studied TV and video, as well as social anthropology, among other things. I have lived and worked in Nicaragua since 2009. Please welcome Jorge Cabellon.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, I know why most of you are here, because, well, there is yet another vicious attack on democracy in Nicaragua. Well, that's what U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says. And yes, you can say actually that it is an attack on democracy as the U.S. understands it. You have to remember that in the 19th century, democracy in Nicaragua for the United States meant sending a certain person named William Walker to invade the country and establish slavery. And you know the rest about US democracy in Nicaragua, like countless invasions, Somoza dictatorship, the Contra War. Well, I'm not going to tire you with the full history, which you probably are acquainted with. So it's to say that Nicaraguan people has always opposed this kind of democracy. And what's going on now in Nicaragua? Well, a number of US-funded and organized and led democracy activists and long-standing members of the local financial oligarchy have been banned from political life. And they are currently being investigated for money laundering and other illicit economic activity, planning of terrorist actions, actively promoting sanctions and even military intervention of Nicaragua. It has to be said that these people are not the opposition in Nicaragua. Currently, there are 17 parties, both national and regional, that are legally registered in Nicaragua. Most of those parties are in opposition to the Sandinista front. 99% of the right-wing political class here in Nicaragua has decided to participate in the elections and play by the rules. By the way, most of those rules were adopted between 1990 and 2006, when there were right-wing political parties in power here in Nicaragua. Another thing that has to be said about what's going on now is not that Ortega, you know, the way the empire has of personalizing politics. Huh? So in this case, it is Ortega is not afraid of any opposition today in Nicaragua. This has nothing to do with fear of opposition. And I'm going to give you an example. I don't have a car. I walk. I go out with my dog every day here in the neighborhood. I live in a popular neighborhood here in Managua. It's in Barrios Orientales, and you can't get more popular than that in Managua. Besides that, I am on TV every week talking politics, and of course, Sandinista politics. Sometimes I'm 2-3 times a week talking in the radio or on TV on these subjects. I have never met any single oppositionist recriminating me for my takes on any issues. On the contrary, I am regularly praised, and people ask me in the street to be even tougher on the so-called puchitos. I mean, little things that so are they called here in Nicaragua, those who supported the defeated coup back in 2018. And why is that? Because those puchitos, those little things, they showed most Nicaraguans what they really wanted to do with the country in 2018, when they had the streets for themselves and the police had retired to their barracks. Since 2018, these people haven't been even capable of organizing a garage sale. They don't have masses. They don't have political presence in the real existing Nicaraguan society. I must remind you that back in 2018, these people robbed, murdered, tortured, kidnapped, and committed all sorts of crimes against ordinary citizens. Plus, they caused a terrible damage to the economy. Polls currently give FSLN an electoral floor of 45 to 50%. That would be the least amount of votes the FSLN would get, and a roof of up to 70 or more % of the votes. Maybe in Nicaragua, 30, 40% of the people tend to identify themselves with the right, but it doesn't mean that they would vote for right-wing parties, especially not those identified with the insurrectional violence and discourses of the putschists back in 2018. I think that less than 10%, far less than 10%, maybe 7% of the people still believe in that insurrectional rhetorical violence that was propagated here in Nicaragua back in 2018. They are what I call fascisticized, but these people are in no way a political majority. They are nowhere near of have a political meaningful presence in the country. Some people say, oh, but the electoral system in Nicaragua is biased in favor of FSLN. Well, I must tell you, FSLN is an hegemonic party in Nicaragua. It's the strongest party. It has presence in all social sectors, especially, of course, among the poor. And that, of course, in any country, having a strong political party gives a certain edge, but the same criticism can be aimed against the social democrats in various countries of Europe, or against Democrats and Republicans in the United States. The truth is that opposition is present at every level of the electoral process in Nicaragua, from the voting venues to those who actually count the votes. The vice president of the Electoral Council, Cairo Amador, whom I know, I've talked to him a number of times, he is not a Sandinista. He is an oppositionist who was against the coup back in 2018. Private funding here in Nicaragua is strictly regulated. Most campaign fundings come from the state. Yet most of the political class is participating in the elections. And why do they participate? Because they live in Nicaragua. They don't have privileged access to the embassy's money. The embassy doesn't hand out money to anyone, just to the people they fully trust in order to be their political operatives. Is the media repressed in Nicaragua? Not at all, on the contrary. Too much freedom to smear, especially Sandinistas. I dare you, go read La Prensa, not just now, go 14 years back in time, and you go to the cartoon section and you will see how they consistently portray Daniel Ortega and Vice President Rosario Murillo in those medias. It's sheer hate propaganda. It would be banned. It would be banned from Twitter, from Facebook, from any social media today who say they oppose so-called fake news and stuff. Actually, this is the tone of the far right press in Nicaragua is full of hatred. You have openly opposition outlets, 3 big TV channels, 10, 12, and 14. The only newspaper in the country is La Prensa, one of the most rabid outlets against the government. Lots of web portals, social media, radios. The opposition in Nicaragua has far more media presence than any leftist political movement in the Americas, even more than some political parties in power. The Nicaraguan putschist right-wing press has more media presence than Morena party in Mexico. López Obrador would dream to have as many media as the right wing here in Nicaragua had. There's a lot of talk about pre-candidates. Pre-candidates have been banned from politics. Pre-candidates says who? Well, the MSN lobby, I mean the mainstream media lobby, CNN, AP, AFP, UPI, the works. Anthony Blinken says that they are pre-candidates. And so do his USA, NID, IDI, IRI, CIA, NSA, and so on. The infamous Narco Rubio in Miami says so. Bob Melendez says so. This Cuban woman, Maria Elvira Salazar, says so. And of course, the Chamorro family, one of the most renowned oligarchic families in Nicaragua, who count several presidents and prime ministers, not prime ministers, generals, vice presidents, and of course, media people here in Nicaragua. They also say that they are pre-candidates, but in reality, they were nothing. What is going now in Nicaragua is not a move out of fear of the opposition. The political object of the struggle today is the rule of law in the country. Nicaragua must be a country with laws that are respected. Since the local elections back in 2018, FSLN came back to power in 2017 with a minority government. And 1 year later, there were some local elections, and the FSLN won by a landslide because they were doing things right. The US has been trying to destroy the rule of law in Nicaragua. Back then, the US funded Sandinista renewal movement, called a fraud in the election, and refused to register its structure with the Electoral Council, thus losing its legal status. If they don't win, they call fraud. And all those who abide by the law, all those political parties that participate in elections and so on, are called traitors, Quislings, and so on. They've known, I mean, these people who are being investigated today, they've known all along that these laws that the government passed were being discussed in the National Assembly. They also knew that the electoral schedule this year would be tight because of the pandemic. They didn't do anything to clean up their act and went on planning for violence and calling for sanctions and traveling around the world and receiving buckets full of money from the United States. Their candidates had no legal parties to back them up here inside Nicaragua. They weren't able to get the established parties to give them their support because their agenda managed to sow confusion for a few weeks, but everything soon fell apart when the people realized that the only thing they were after was to destroy the country. The soft coup, the so-called soft coup, caused serious damage to the economy. Thousands of businesses had to close and tourism collapsed. Then came the COVID pandemic last year. And at the end of the year, 2 hurricanes, Eta and Iota, the 2 strongest in the recent history in the country. Back in 2018, the USA funded the coup with at least $160 million. I mean, the real figures will become known in many years' time. It's difficult to talk exact figures, but we count on 160 million between 2015 and 2021. Since the coup was defeated in 2018, there's been amnesty for the involved. A dialogue process was attempted and was carried out, but proved futile because these people didn't want to discuss politics. Their agenda was not about politics. It was about destruction. It was about conquer. A grassroots peace and reconciliation process was carried out with social programs for youths and for the families all over the country. That process was completely was not talked about by the MSM media in the West. All those opportunities have been squandered by the putschists. The imperial party line here in Nicaragua has been an insurrection against the so-called regime. The problem is that the country is a normal country. The problem is that this country has institutions that function, and it has a government that actually has the support of the vast majority of the population. In the meantime, the institutions have become stronger and stronger all the time since 2008 to today's 2021. The US last year, the last 2 years have been pumping in lots of money to destroy the Sandinista government. The Violeta Barrios del Chamorro Foundation received lots of money to fund the insurrectionist media in the country. FUNIDES, which is an oligarchic free enterprise think tank, has received lots of money, and in their leadership are the presidents of the two largest banks here in Nicaragua, are various speculation financists and other very rich people. Through these FUNIDES and COSET, which is the employers' organization affiliated to the United States, of course, were pumped in money that paid salaries for about $8,000 a month, which in Nicaragua is a huge lot of money, for the bosses that carried out this putschist politic against Nicaragua. And another organization, the Institute of Public Policies, EEPPP, led by Felix Maradiaga, which was in charge of putschist operatives, also terrorist actions. Besides all that funding, the sanctions, and those are the three groups that are being under investigation now. Besides all that money that was pumped in, the sanctions do affect us because they make it more difficult to access to international loans, although Nicaragua's good execution record helps the country. We have to do more than the rest of the countries with the few resources at our disposal. And we are forced to change ministers in order to fulfill legal obligations because of the sanctions. Above all, the character assassination the empire is carrying out against Nicaragua affects us, especially tourism industry, in spite of us being the safest country in Latin America today, both when it comes to health and to general security issues. We have been recovering from all the blows, and this year we will resume the path of economic growth. We expect to grow about 3.5%, maybe up to 6%, maybe more. As poor as Nicaragua is, we have fiscal stability conditions far superior to those of the rest of our Central American neighbors. We do not owe like 80–90% of the GDP like El Salvador does, or Costa Rica, which is in dire problems right now. We have enviable levels of social cohesion in our region, and we have a broad organizational structure to deal with hurricanes, earthquakes, or health emergencies so common in our latitudes. On November the 7th, we are going to an election. No matter how much Mr. Anthony Blinken shrieks and threatens, the Nicaraguan people will continue to support the Sandinista front. Nicaraguan laws will rule in Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, the empire and the oligarchy will never rule again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jorge. You really helped us to put Nicaragua in the right perspective, I think, compared to the news that we so often hear in the United States and elsewhere in the world. Now we'll turn from some rather negative news that Jorge was presenting in terms of the media coverage. We will be turning to the amazing advances going on in Nicaragua right now. And first we'll turn to the next speaker, Winnie Narvaez. And one moment. Winnie Narvaez Herrera is a Nicaraguan who holds a degree in sociology and a master in sustainable development from the University of Leuven in Belgium. She is also an artist from the National School of Fine Arts in Managua. In Nicaragua, she has worked on rural development, housing cooperatives, and cooperative social education research and promotion at an organization that I may, Abaco in Red. Okay, welcome, Winnie Narvaez.
Can you listen to me? Because I cannot listen.
You can't hear? You can't hear us? Can you speak?
Issues, but if you can listen, it's okay.
If you can speak loudly, it's better. But yes, we can hear you. You're soft, though.
Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being listening to this conversation. I will share some highlights of the social advances in Nicaragua since 2007, when the Sandinistas won the elections. I have organized the social advances on categories: education, health, family, and gender equity. But I remark that in practice, these aspects are not separated, since one of the main strategies of the government is the coordinated work among all the institutions and departments. So I will start pointing that the outcomes on each period are based on the access of each national human development programs from 2009 to 2011, from 2012 to 2016, and from 2017 to 2021. As well as the continuity of the outcomes reached during the revolution in the 80s. So regarding education, in January 11th was declared the National Day of Education when in 2007, President Daniel Ortega declared free education access to all. This is very meaningful as represents the restitution of a right that began during the revolution in the 80s and was interrupted by other governments. Since 2009, there are educative center resources for handicapped people located at the 8 national normal schools. And there are also a resource center for blind people located in the Ministry of Education, where educative material is adapted and reproduced in Braille. Most of you may have heard from the literacy campaign. One of the most remarkable during the 80s. To continue with this program from 2010 to 2018, illiteracy was reduced from 24% to 4%. This has been followed up with education programs for youth and adults, where rural volunteers are trained as popular educators to teach how to read and write on their communities. I have recently known some of the participants of these programs, and it is very inspiring. Since 2014, there is also rural education. We have rural primary, rural secondary, and rural university, to encourage people to remain in their towns and villages instead of migrating to the city. It is important to mention that most of the students are rural workers on the week, hence these programs are developed on the weekends. The content in these programs include essential topics for rural areas like agroecology and sustainable development. Regarding technical education, more than 45 centers have been built, and the number of careers has gone from 19 careers in 2006 to to 60 careers currently, and 5 in virtual modality. There are 600 rural schools for technical education, and there are also 75,898 empirical work certifications for workers like welders, masons. And recently, there was the second graduation of the computer school for Rama communities in the Caribbean coast, in coordination with the regional system. Regarding quality of education, in 2017, we started a program called Alliance for Education Quality that was designed and financed by World Bank. This is focused on the improvement of pedagogical practices in all teachers and improvement of educative conditions in terms of infrastructure. This program also included a strategy during COVID-19 pandemic. Since 2018, there is the core education for childhood development model to promote physical, cognitive, emotional, and social development among 3 to 5 years old. School since 2017, and for more cooperative. Can you hear me fine?
We can hear you now. We missed a few words, I think, but you can continue.
I cannot listen to you,
Okay.
But if you are listening to me, it's okay.
Okay.
I think
it's good. Keep going.
Hello.
Yes.
It seems like it stopped. Okay, sorry.
We can hear you.
So in 2015, there was a recognition by World Food Program about the food program for children as the biggest protection program in Nicaragua. So the government provides food to 2 million children annually. Okay. So regarding the pandemic, the pandemic has had diversity of responses to diversity of context. So face-to-face classes were not compulsory, despite UNESCO congratulated the government for not closing schools during the pandemic. But this is important that it was not compulsory. So for those who did not want to go to school, there were TV programs, because we have TV program educations since 2016. And there were also radio programs and printed documents for those who wanted to continue on their there were also for those going to school to face-to-face, face mask were compulsory, as well as constant hand washing for that. Lavatories were installed at the entrance of the schools. The video seems stuck, so I'm not sure if this is working.
Yes, it's working. Colleen or Jorge, you're both in the room. I don't know if that.
It's technical issues. Okay.
We hear you.
Regarding health, a national health policy was designed in 2008 to state the priority of the government in the social quality of life. So since then, we have universal free health care that is improving every year with more professional infrastructure and community involvement. The national health attention is based on a family and community health model. And this means that all the family and community are involved in the taking care of the health. We have national vaccination campaigns every year. This is also something that continues since the 80s. And children are vaccinated against 16 diseases, and adults get vaccinated against influenza. We have the COVID vaccination voluntary campaign that is currently for those 55 and older. There is also follow-up to people traveling to Nicaragua. They get a call and ask if they have any symptom related to COVID. There is also a campaign to combat dengue and other mosquito-led illnesses where workers from the Ministry of Health fumigate home to home. And during winter, they also go home to home asking for symptoms like fever or flu. Some of these persons are also volunteers for the Ministry of Health from the same community model. Regarding infrastructure, we have 937 new health units and 1,137 health units have been improved. We have also 8 new hospitals under construction. Regarding family, there is a special focus on childhood. So since 2012, there is a national policy of childhood. And since 2008, there is a program called LOVE program. This is a component of the national system for the social wealth with the participation of Family Ministry, Health Ministry, Education Ministry, Ministry of Government, Social Security Nicaraguan Institute, and the Human Rights Procuracy. This is focused on right restitution according to life cycle. So the attention areas are first, childhood direction that foresees the childhood development centers, which have gone from 32 in 2007 to 273 today, attending more than 16,000 kids younger than 6 years old. And 70% of these are managed by the municipalities. There are another program of this LOVE program, another action is home-to-home visits to families with children younger than 6 years old for early simulation material and information. This is planned by the Ministry of Health. There are also prevention centers for people consuming drugs. There are also family schools to teach values. And there are also elderly care centers and attention. And in the recognition of these advances, for example, UNICEF signed an agreement in force from 2019 to 2023. Another right that has been guaranteed is the right to recreation. Since 2015, with the rehabilitation of parks in the whole country, and this is a coordinated program between Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure and municipalities. And the last aspect is equity between women and men. So in 2008, a law was passed, the Law of Equal Rights and Opportunities to guarantee equal access to women and men in economic, politics, and social areas. So priority has been given to economy. Therefore, there are programs such as Zero Usury benefiting 402,000 women the last 13 years. There is another program called Zero Hunger, which was congratulated by FAO in 2013 that provide loans and livestock to women, Many of them have organized in cooperatives or women's unions, also supported by the Ministry of Associative, Communitary, Cooperative Economy. So the support given includes slogan training and national fairs every weekend, where small peasant and self-employed workers can sell their products. This has been a cooperative work with international allies such as Taiwan. Some of these programs have been congratulated in the past, as I said, by FAO. There is also some other sources you can find where these programs are mentioned. In Nicaragua, it's also, according to the Economic World Forum, the 5th in gender equity in the world, and 5th in percentage of women in government and ministerial positions. And UN Women and Interparliamentary Union in 2021, Women in Politics map shows that 58.8% of all ministries in Nicaragua government are headed by women. A women's primer was distributed in 2020, promoting women's rights and information about the services available for those dealing with any kind of violence and any other injustice against women. I would like to end clarifying that as the National Health Policy decided in 2008, there are other priorities not mentioned here, but transversal to what I have mentioned, such as water access and citizen participation. Thank you.
And I thank you, Winnie, and you were very good about coming in on time too. Thank you for your interesting presentation. I learned a lot of new things about.
Try to reconnect to see if it works better.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Next, I would like to introduce Colleen Littlejohn. Colleen has been living in Nicaragua for most of the last 41 years. She's worked for a wide range of organizations, such as Catholic Relief Services, the International Reconstruction Fund, FIR, Nicaraguan Network, CAPRI, which is a local development NGO that she founded in 1988, Save the Children Canada in Managua and Toronto, and the World Bank in Nicaragua, Liberia, West Africa, and in Washington, D.C. Please welcome Colleen Littlejohn.
Thanks very much, Barbara. I'm going to talk a little bit about the economic advances, starting off just by telling you that even as a young girl, I knew I wanted to work in socioeconomic development, though I really wasn't sure where or with whom. I got a master's degree from a prestigious university in the United States because I figured that would help open doors to get a job. I did think about the Peace Corps, but they were looking for beekeepers in those years, so no. Years later, I thought about going back to school to get a PhD, but one of my favorite professors from grad school told me it would be a waste of time, and he was so right, because living and working in Nicaragua for the most of the last 41 years in different types of organizations has been the most incredible learning experience of my life. Nicaragua has been creating, especially over the last 15 years, a model of equitable, green, pro-poor economic and social development. It is a model that should be studied and shared throughout the world. The seeds of this model were planted in the first couple of years after the triumph of the Sandinista Revolution in 1979, when there was relative peace and so much energy to create in Nicaragua, especially in health and education and redistribution of assets like land reform. There was the first national literacy campaign, about the land reform, clinics, schools, promoting rural and urban cooperatives to get people back to work, and lots of other efforts. But the honeymoon didn't last very long. US aggression intensified to the point of exhaustion. And then in 1990, 16 years and 3 presidents ago, many of those achievements were lost. That changed with the elections of 2007, And when President Ortega then had the chance that he had been waiting for to have at least 6 to 10 years of peace to fulfill his dream of building a new Nicaragua, where the primary objective was wealth creation and poverty reduction through broadly shared economic growth. The key principles to start that new Nicaragua had to do with commitment to sound macroeconomic and fiscal policy, as well as a healthy investment climate, to be able to reactivate not only big businesses, but also small businesses, the reactivation of rural production and the small and medium enterprises, and also targeted social programs. And the goals were very strongly aligned to the Millennium Development Goals of 2015. I remember a meeting at a university in Nicaragua where private sector and the government began to study a strategy to cooperate, a strategy which included labor unions and joint negotiations. I remember the government saying to the more endowed private sector that the state would not be giving them financing, they had their own, but that the government would work to create an effective business environment for all, with investments in energy, water, roads, etc. And we were living then in the days of 12-hour power outages every day. The strategies developed worked. Between 2000 and 2017, Nicaragua achieved incredible results in the reduction of poverty and extreme poverty, in economic growth, delivery of basic services in health, education, energy, water, sanitation, women and children's rights, communication, foreign and local investment, agricultural and development, and so many other things. And right now I'd like to just give you some of our examples. First, poverty was reduced from 48.3% to 24.9% in those 14 years. And extreme poverty was reduced from 17.5% to 6.9%. So the poverty rates halved. The countries, and talking about growth rates, the country's average growth rate between 2010 and 2017 was a booming 5.1%, one of the best in Latin America. There were massive investments in basic infrastructure because you can't reduce poverty without the basics. Today, Nicaragua is connected physically by the best highways in Central America, and they're in the top 5 in the rest of Latin America, according to the World Economic Forum. And internet also connects and unites the whole country. A couple years ago, I was in Pearl Lagoon, and I got a phone call in WhatsApp from Liberia, West Africa. I mean, that's amazing when you think about it. Another example, 98% of the population now have electricity compared to 54% in 2006. And at least 85% of that is generated from renewable sources, up from 26% in 2006. In 2006, only 65% of the population had access to potable water, but that rose to 91.8% in 2018, and we expect to meet 95% in 2023. Significant resources were also appropriated to some of the poorest areas of the country, especially the Caribbean coast and what they call the dry sector. Those investments in the Caribbean coast really facilitated the emergency response of the last hurricane season, getting emergency supplies before the hurricane struck in 8 hours by road instead of 3 to 4 or even a week makes a big difference. It's also important to note that 66% of the national budget is for health and education, not military spending, as in other countries we know. And this has meant that the community-based preventative health system, a heritage from the late 70s and 80s, has been incredibly strengthened. When he talked about all the hospitals, the new ones that are being constructed, but there's also another statistic that's very interesting. In 2006, there were 2,715 doctors. There are now 6,045 doctors. Popular housing is also a major priority in the last several years, and it's being strengthened now with a new loan from the Central America Integration Development Bank, which will construct over 23,500 houses this year. Since 2007, the government of Nicaragua has also made significant investments in grassroots agriculture production and urban microcredit programs prioritizing women. Nicaragua is a food secure country. It produces about 90% of the food consumed in the country, and most of that is produced by small farmers. In addition, Nicaragua was becoming a major world tourist attraction. In 2007, there were 749,000 tourists that came to visit. In 2017, that number had risen to 1,787,000. Tourism is starting to increase again, despite the US raising the travel warning to the level maximum 4 for US citizens. The excuse is the pandemic, but in the other countries of Central America that have had much worse situations, they're at 3 or lower. But anyway, at the same time, Nicaragua was awarded the Safe Travel Seals of Approval from the World Travel and Tourism Council in relation to COVID-19 biosafety protocols for tourists. There is a problem right now with some of the airlines that are not coming, but other airlines are improving their flights. So these people that want to come will be coming soon. Private investment continues, perhaps not at the rate of a few years ago due to the current health crisis, but last year there was a major investment in building a natural gas plant on the site of one of the most important parts of the Pacific, and that will be functioning by the end of the year. This will lower the use of imported petroleum significantly. But now I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the factors that led to these achievements, because it's not just money to develop a country. First of all, you need careful planning, development planning, and evaluation, and that has been key here. The government began to create a national development plan about a year after assuming power in 2007. These plans are evaluated and updated every 5 years, and the latest for 2021 to 2026 was just announced. The other key factor is that the president has placed very competent and highly effective people in the different government positions. Nicaragua's ministries and ministers have been highly respected by their counterparts in multilateral development agencies, including the IMF. This has led to very productive aid negotiations and discussions, but it's always clear who makes the difference. The government makes the difference. I will never forget the parting words of an IMF rep who was finalizing his mission in Nicaragua, something to the effect that he had learned that macroeconomic stability management was not a thing of the right or a left government, but of a responsible government doing the best for its people. Poverty reduction has also been helped by including direct support for some low-income sectors, including targeted subsidies for public transportation and energy under a certain usage. And that energy subsidy helps at least 80% of the population. There's also special half pensions for those senior citizens who are not able to complete the required 750 weeks needed for a full pension at the retirement age of 60. Another factor important is that Nicaragua is recognized for the transparency and the use of both national and international funds. The multilateral agencies, the World Bank, the IDB, IMF, et cetera, they have all affirmed at one time or another that their portfolios in Nicaragua have been very well managed and very well and transparently managed. I think the final part I'd like to talk about now is what are the major threats to the continued economic development of Nicaragua, and not just Nicaragua, but also to most countries around the world, especially taking into account the devastating effects of climate change. And the first major threat is natural disasters, including pandemics. After the devastation of Hurricane Mitch in October of 1988, the Alemán government received huge flows of emergency aid, but economic growth dropped to less than 1%. Even worse, very little preparation was put in place to mitigate the damage of Hurricane Mitch, to the extent that President Alemán ignored the appeals of the mayor of a small town near León to evacuate her people, and no help came, and several thousand people died. You contrast that to the response of President Ortega's government to the two Category 5 hurricanes, Eta and Iota, that hit last year. Because Nicaragua has developed over the years a very efficient and tested national system of disaster prevention and mitigation, coordinated by a government agency called SINAPRED, who activated a response a week before the first hurricane hit. 100,000 emergency volunteers were mobilized, 160,000 people evacuated, more than almost 1,200 shelters built and safe houses identified before to supply the food and the mattresses and stuff that were sent days earlier. And no deaths were attributed to at them, but 16 did die in Iota, all related to people who refused to leave their homes or went back without advice. On November 24th of last year, the Minister of Finance estimated that the economic damages from the 2 hurricanes was over $742 million, equivalent to 6.2 of Nicaragua's gross domestic product. But a couple of days after the hurricane hit, Nicaragua received a check for $30.6 million right away, thanks to the incredible competence of the government and its leaders, because they anticipated a worse than normal hurricane season. So they increased its tropical cyclone insurance coverage from the Caribbean Catastrophic Risk Insurance Facility. And as a result, the country received the much needed payout under the excess rainfall and tropical cyclone policies. So that's really incredibly effective planning. With respect to COVID, Nicaragua's strategy response to the pandemic, using their own resources in the initial stages, has resulted in the lowest number of infections and deaths and the highest recovery rate in the region, and I would say in the world, whilst keeping all the borders open under rigorous safety protocols. Okay, but probably the major factor of Nicaragua's economic success during the last 14 years has been that it has been a country at peace most of the time, internally and with its neighbors, and no one except for the United States considers Nicaragua a serious threat to their national security. Internally, the country has ensured high levels of citizen security for her 6.5 million people through the development of community policing. Nicaragua has the lowest homicide rate in Central America, and efforts to neutralize organized crime, gangs, and drug cartels have been very successful. Internationally, Nicaragua is one of the few countries in the world that has regularly used the international justice system, mostly in both border disputes with neighbors like Honduras, Costa Rica, and Colombia. In all those cases, Nicaragua accepted and implemented the judgment of the International Court, unlike the United States 36 years ago. Nicaragua sought justice because of the US financing the Contra and direct attacks on the port of Corinto. Nicaragua won the judgment and is still waiting to receive the $17 billion indemnization to help in the reconstruction of those years. And they were awarded it because the US was condemned because of their financing of the Contra War. But recently, the most dangerous threat to the continued growth and prosperity to Nicaragua was the violence of the attempted coup in early 2018, which caused more economic damage than the emergencies which followed, the pandemic and the hurricanes. By end 2018, economic growth dropped to negative 4%. The end of 2019, it was still at a negative rate of 3.9%. And towards the end of 2019, there were signs that things were getting better. But then came COVID and the hurricanes, and GDP growth was again negative for 2020 at negative 2.3%. So 3 years of negative growth. But that's predicted to change this year. Exports and family remittances are rising. Multilateral aid from several sources has been renewed partly. And despite the effects of the hurricane and the pandemics, there's a good possibility, according to the president of the central bank, that growth this year will be conservatively estimated between 2.5 and 3.5. Ending, I'd like to say that, like Nicaragua, the whole world urgently needs peace, security, stability, and a new economic order which gives priority to life, health, and the fight against poverty. If the so-called developed nations of the North really want to learn about the development, they should be coming to Nicaragua to see the lessons learned instead of using their so-called development assistance to finance regime change. Instead of strengthening illegal sanctions on the country and its leaders, they should be asking advice and learning from the experience of a country whose people are not participating in the lengthy marches to the United States via Mexico to escape the corruption, violence, and abject poverty of those countries in the Northern Triangle. So let's work to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you to all three of our speakers. This was very informative, I think. And so as moderator, I'm going to give myself the privilege of asking the first question. How can we get your government, the Nicaraguan government, here in the United States We need some of these programs ourselves, like universal health care, more care for the disabled, free college, many of the things that you mentioned in your presentations. Thank you so much. Since I know you can't answer that question, we'll go on to some questions that perhaps you really can answer. First of all, and this could be directed to anyone who wishes to answer it, why does Nicaragua allow the National Endowment for Democracy and other foreign funding to come to the opposition? Okay, Jorge.
Well, the answer is no, it's not. The whole problem is because they were receiving this kind of political money. There is a law, the law 1055, that was recently passed, and that according to that law, all those politicians who receive funds from other governments, they and demand the intervention of Nicaragua, they are automatically banned from the political rights to be elected to office, to public office. Besides the foreign asset law that was recently passed, it means, I mean, it's almost a copy of the United States law passed in the 1930s, I think. And that effectively prohibits receiving money for political ends from foreign powers. So that's the problem. What I want to stress is that this is part of a historical process of nation building. This with the National Endowment for Democracy, as you probably know, is not new. National Endowment for Democracy was funded in the 1980s, when it became all too obvious that the US aid was interfering in the politics of many countries all over the world. So as one of the first bosses of National Endowment for Democracy used to say, National Endowment for Democracy does legally what the CIA did undercover against all the countries. So in the 80s, and you must remember, we have a so-called low intensity. It was no low intensity whatsoever. I mean, Nicaragua was destruction-wise was like Syria. It has to be stressed. It has to be said. If you take into account the population of Nicaragua and the amount of destruction that was caused the country, this was a major war. And during the 80s, the US funded the Contras front, who were based in Honduras, to attack Nicaragua. And in the elections of 1990, these groups received lots of money from the United States. In 1990 alone, it was $12 million from 1990. That is worth a lot more than it is today. It means probably hundreds of millions of dollars. And since then, there has been all this toxic funding of the right-wing groups here in Nicaragua from the United States. The thing is that Nicaragua as a nation has become stronger with the years. You know, the institutionality of the country has become much stronger. After 2018, when FSLN came back to power back in 2007, it had a minority government. It had to discuss things with other parties in order to achieve things in the parliament. The problem was that these parties had no politics, and FSLN became very popular because it was doing things that were very basic for the population who was starving. The public services didn't work. Lots of people were living in places they had no property rights. So all that was settled by this government, and much more as we have heard right now with these two presentations about the social achievements of the Sandinista government. But all that has made the Nicaraguan society much stronger, and all the legal framework and everything is in place. And the problem is that they want to keep doing the same thing. The United States dreams that they were going to topple the FSLN from power. That's silly. That's stupid. You see, stop doing that. You're hurting yourself doing that, because the United States has no policy towards Central America and is in the hands of a bunch of thugs, literally. So that's the point. I mean, and the political object here is the survival of the Nicaraguan institutional framework as a nation versus the destruction of Nicaragua, which would be a serious major tragedy for the whole of Central America, because Nicaragua is the largest country of Central America. It's in the middle of this geopolitically important area, and everybody would lose if Nicaragua goes under.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Winnie a question. I'm wondering, Winnie, could you tell us a little bit more, please, about how the educational system in Nicaragua handled school children and university students and so forth during the pandemic? How did they make sure that everybody stayed safe and continued their education?
Yeah, so regarding primary and secondary school, as I mentioned before, there were no schools closed, but this was not compulsory, like going to school. Even even private schools, they had the chance to ask for permission to close or to continue open. So it was not, they were not forced to open. So most of them closed, the privates, and the publics kept open. But children, I mean, families who did not want children to go to school, they could continue through TV programs, which we have education TV programs since 2016. And there were also radio programs. This is very useful, mainly in rural areas. People use it a lot. And there was also printed material, so children could go to, or families, could go to the school and get the material, go home, and then come back and keep the assignments, give the assignments to the professors. And this is also part of this community model, similar to the health model. It works in the education. Regarding universities, the public universities also continue open and privates close. It's similar than school. But face masks have been always compulsory, and the lavatories, like hand lavatories, were installed in all schools, every school at the entrance. So I think those were big efforts, because it was also like things that you have to do like very fast. Yeah.
Thank you. Colleen, there's a question here from someone who wants to know what kind of statistics are available now to bring the poverty figures up to date, because the figures you cited are coming from 2016. Are there any more recent statistics available?
I think some of them are more than 2016, but no, what I used right now was some of government statistics and World Bank statistics, but I'm not sure, because of the pandemic, if any type of surveys have really been, if they've been able to really collect the data that they need to. So I don't have that information right now, but we do have information. For example, from the energy company about the statistics for the electricity, for example, the water company, et cetera. But I'm not sure as far as, generally they do poverty assessments and things like that, the multilaterals, for example, but, nobody's been doing that for the last couple of years. So.
Okay. This is a question that seems to pop up in nearly every webinar. But we can answer it quickly, I think. What happened to the canal that was proposed to go across Nicaragua?
Yeah. I think if I remember correctly, in the new development plan for the next 4 or 5 years, it's there. I was recent, but there's no information about, I don't think that anybody is going, nobody's been identified who's going to do it, because the Chinese contract that ended, after 5 years, but the country was left with over $1 billion worth of studies and plans, et cetera. But I want to comment, because I was in Panama recently, and I had never really been to Panama except for the airport, and I saw the Panama Canal, and it was, you can really see the need for a new canal. And Nicaragua has the ideal setting for it. So if they could get an international group, problem with Panama Canal is that it's dominated by one country, and that one country is not Panama. So it would need something here that wouldn't be dominated by the United States. But it's in the plans, so we'll see.
Any other comments? I know there's been concern about, and this is addressed to anybody on the panel, concern about the environmental impacts. The environmental impact studies that were done, were they pretty thorough?
Well, the environmental studies were very thorough, I must say. But, well, I think that the geopolitical conditions changed somewhat from 2014 to this day, but the project is still, Nicaragua as a nation is the canal, the possibility of the construction of the canal. That's the point of Nicaragua's and Central America's sovereignty. So the project is still alive. And I must tell you, now in Nicaragua, we have land connection between the Pacific and the Atlantic coast. Never in 200 years of independent existence had Nicaragua have good roads connecting both sides of the country. Yeah. At the same time, and they are they're quality roads, and very important bridges are being built as of today, to cross some rivers that are very big, like Wawa River in the North Atlantic coast. And at the same time, in the next years, 2 deep water ports will be built in the Atlantic and the Pacific. In practice, Nicaragua is building the canal. You see, maybe not at the same scale as it was talked about. When was it? Like 10 years ago or something? Many years ago. The conditions have changed, but the project is there, and the project is good. The project is about guaranteeing fresh water for the whole country. It's about planting lots of trees. It's not about destroying the environment. And it is also about helping a multipolar world order. So the project is there. The conditions will be right again.
This is a question for Jorge also. I am from Mexico. This person is saying, I am from Mexico, so I would like to have a list of reliable information from local sources, all of them in Spanish. Are you able to provide that to this person? Or do you have anything you'd like to recommend while we're online here?
Yeah, sure. Well, I answered that in written form to that question, but go to Tortilla con Sal, .com. That there you will find lots of info in Spanish, in English, and in some other languages. The government's web portal, el19digital.com. And then you have my blog, managuaconamor.blogspot.com. And from there, you will find many web pages with good information about what's going on in Nicaragua.
And even some of the information on the AFGJ website is translated into Spanish, or originally written in Spanish and translated into English. So you can look there as well. Okay. Another question is, and I think I can help answer this, but I invite anybody who wishes to join in. Do you do work brigades or visitor brigades as Cuba has done? I have been advocating them since my early 30s and would love to come. I'll start answering that, and I know others will say more about it. Just that we are looking right now at some delegations to Nicaragua. I believe there's even a solidarity one being thought of for a month from now in July. And then in late September, early October, there will be at least one other. So please, others, add to what I've said.
Barbara? I know that if you look at the Friends of the ATC, they're organizing some brigades. I'm not exactly sure of the dates right now, but they will have their website, and it'll also be on the website of the Alliance for Global Justice. And I don't think that the brigades now, they're actually out organizing I think a coffee picking brigade or something, sort of like, but I'm not sure. But if there's interest in organizing them, that's we'd be interested in working with people who want to come down. We're thinking of, we want to get people down here to actually see what's going on and avoid all of this, bull that's being written. We always talk about the threat of a good example, but people, I think from your first question, our people in the United States should come and see what's happening and what their government is trying to destroy, are things that we would like to have in our own country.
Okay. Well, here's another overall kind of question. I'll ask Jorge, but then feel free, anyone else, to answer it too. Is Nicaragua banding together with other regional governments to fight U.S. imperialism? And then they include Venezuela, Bolivia, Peru, and Cuba, for example.
Oh, yes. Nicaragua is a member of the ALBA, the Bolivarian Alternative for the Peoples of Our America. I mean, our America, all right? It's not like, it is America of the indigenous people, America, the America south of Rio Bravo, and the people who are struggling in North America also. That's the kind of America we envision. And Nicaragua became officially a member in 2007. It was the first thing when Commander Daniel came back to power, and that he decided that Nicaragua would go in this alliance. But already in 2004, 2005, when Nicaragua was in chaos, when no public services worked, when there was no electricity, when people had to take their own needles to the hospitals, and the children had to bear their own chairs to the classrooms. Back then, the Sandinista local governments started to make deals with ALBA in order to guarantee literacy campaigns, to get oil in order to have energy to move the vehicles and stuff. So we have a very, very long tradition. Nicaragua is also a member of the group of the Sao Paulo Forum. I mean, it's the gathering of all the left-wing parties of the whole Latin America. It's been a member of that organization since it's one of the founders, actually. And Nicaragua is, together with, I think it is Brazil, is one of the two countries that have hosted the Sao Paulo Forum three times throughout its history. Nicaragua is a long, the Sandinista front and the Nicaragua government is a long, old friend of the Palestinian people. It's an outstanding member of the UN's decolonization committee, a long friend of the Puerto Rican people. I mean, what can I tell you? Huh? A long friend of the Cuban people. So of course, I mean, we are struggling against imperialism as one. That can I guarantee you.
Okay. Well, here's a rather simple question to answer, I hope. Dora Maria Tejas is given as an example, but I'm sure that she's not the only one who fits in the example. Why is she opposed to the Ortegas?
Well, there are many answers. I mean, it's something that even I think that the psychologists must be discussing those things also. Well, there was a phenomenon here in Nicaragua. Many people who actually made a career within the structures of the Sandinista government and the FSLN. When FSLN lost the elections back in 1990, well, they went through some kind of a crisis, and their evaluation was probably that since the Soviet Union no longer existed, then empire, it made no reason, there was no reason to fight the imperialism. We were a member of the empire. We should become friends with the empire, and let they rule Nicaragua instead. Some of these people were members of the Chamorro family, because one part of the oligarchy here in Nicaragua, when the Somoza dictatorship was crumbling apart, one part of the oligarchy opposed Somoza, and one part of them attempted to get into the FSLN. If you have any doubts about what I'm saying, you just go to the Vault, WikiLeaks diplomatic cables. The site is called the Vault, and then you can study all these documentations, what the embassy actually had for contacts here in Managua during the dictatorship. You will find many interesting things about what I'm saying. But the thing is that maybe there were these people who they were intellectuals, they had worked as diplomats, they had high posts. So they decided to go social democrat. But going social democrat in Nicaragua means going imperialist. It's not just a matter about taxes and stuff, you know. So why? What happened to these people? Well, most of the FSLN's representation in the parliament in the early 90s went over to the Renovadores. There was a Congress and they lost. They wanted FSLN to go social democrat. They lost the elections. Since they lost the elections, they took all their seats in the parliament and went over to the right. And they started to work with the right. Among them was this woman, Dora Maria Tejas. Why did they do that? Well, I think it was resentment. I think it was resentment because they thought that they were best, they knew best how to lead the FSLN, they knew best how to lead the country. They were civilized people. They were not like the illiterate masses. And I must tell you, I have never seen so much hatred. I know these people. I've talked to them. I know them through the years, and I tell you, I never see so much hatred. So it was almost natural for them to go into U.S. Toxic sphere, so to speak. And then they tried to make a parallel between today's Nicaragua and the struggle against Somoza. And they started to develop all these insurrectional strategies that have no people backing them up. It's only elitist projects aimed at destroying the nation, actually. So, well, I think that's some explanation. History will give the full picture, I think, someday.
Well, we're nearly out of time here, so I want to make a couple of comments. I have been pulling the various comments in the chat and the questions, and anything that did not get answered yet, we will endeavor to answer when we send out the follow-up email, because we will be sending the recording to all the registrants of this webinar. And we can also add some other references. For example, some people are saying, could we please have references to some of the material that you've talked about? So we can do that as well. There's one final question. I wonder if someone could answer this fairly quickly. But there are two questions that are related, having to do with infrastructure. What is planned now in terms of major infrastructure projects? And let's see, including the oil processing facility, the proposed Bluefields port, advances in renewable energy. And where is the Pacific Deepwater Port going to be?
I'm not sure, actually, I don't have all the information on that. The Bluefields, I think they're in the design process. I'm not sure if that's finished, but I would have to check. The major oil, that natural gas project is, I actually drove by there a couple of weeks ago, and it's very, very well advanced. So I think by the end of this year, that will be in motion. What was the port in Bluefields, the major infrastructure. There's the major and there's also the minor, like the Attican roads, like the cobblestone roads that connect the country. Now there's this whole plan to that, and the country is connected. I mean, I drove from Managua to Bluefields a year and a half ago in 6 hours, door to door. And there's a lot of things to connect all the different parts of the country. So, but I'm not sure exactly where but you could get that information on the websites of the different offices, I think, of the different offices. Some of them are in planning stages, might not have the money yet, but and others already have the money. So a big source of that financing lately is coming from the Central America Economic Integration Development Bank. And then the ongoing projects of the World Bank and the IDB. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming, and I certainly thank our speakers. You've provided an immense amount of information. It was very interesting. Thank you to all of you. And as I said, we will be following up. So goodbye for now, but you'll be hearing from us. Bye-bye.